Hello and welcome back to What the Frick podcast. We are still on our 20 days in Europe mini episodes. In this episode, I will be focusing on my time in Nice, France. So to start off, if we're just picking up where we left off from London, my friend and I made our way from London Heathrow to Nice, France. And if there's one thing about London that is just probably the worst thing about traveling is Heathrow. That airport is obviously massive and just very difficult. And we actually got pulled during security because of the liquids rule. And this is a rule sort of all across Europe. And that's you have to fit all of your liquids, which have to be under 100 milliliters, just like here in the States, into a quart-sized plastic bag. And that is very difficult, especially for us girls, because we need all of our liquids. I think I had face sunscreen, regular sunscreen. I had my face lotion that I put on at night to, keep my skin okay. My friend had detangler spray. I didn't even bother bringing shampoo or conditioner because I just assumed the hotels would have it. So many different kinds of liquids, and makeup counts too. So mascara, concealer, anything like that, you have to be able to fit into this quart-sized bag, which is honestly impossible. So my friend got pulled because she was just like, I don't care. I'm just going to see what happens. So she had all of her liquids just in her normal little bag thingy. And so I actually did the same thing. I had my setting spray for my makeup that I left in my luggage, and then I actually put all of my bagged liquids in my backpack. So when I got there, my luggage got flagged, but my backpack was fine. So when he pulled our bags, he was like, do you have other liquids? And I was like, no. So he thought that my only liquids was just that tiny little setting spray that I had just, coincidentally forgotten to take out. So I actually got to keep all of my liquids, but my friend wasn't quite as lucky because he pulled everything from the same bag, and he was like, you can't have two bags because you only get one quart-sized bag per passenger. And she was pulling things out, and she's like, that's not a liquid, that's something else. And he was like, fine. And he was looking at her like she was crazy. Thankfully it was all in good fun, and I convinced him that I had only had that little setting spray. So I was like, well, can we just stick some of her stuff in my bag? Because there's a rule that if you're traveling with two people and someone doesn't have a bag, then you can use another bag. Very confusing, but regardless, we kind of finessed the system and we got to keep all of her liquids. So if you're going to Europe, just keep in mind that if you're at the airports, they're gonna be very strict about this. Although in one of the airports, I didn't have any issues whatsoever, so I'm not sure they just didn't care. But moving on to Nice. Nice. So the reason I picked Nice was because I really wanted to go to Croatia, but it was very hard to get to Croatia. Just in general, you had to fly into other places or take trains. And at the time, this entire trip I had planned was going to be a solo trip. I happened to have my friend tag along, not that last minute, a few months in advance. So I didn't want to be traveling by myself and taking all these buses and trains and connecting flights alone. I've done stuff like that before with other people, and it's exhausting, doing all of these different methods of transportation to get from one place to another. So I was like, I'll do it another time. I'm just going to focus on, cities I can get to either by a direct flight or something very simple. But I wanted to go somewhere somewhat coastal and tropical, and there's a direct flight from London to Nice, and then a direct flight from Nice to Madrid, which was my next stop. So Nice, let me just tell you, was absolutely beautiful in everything you would think it was. The French Riviera is basically like the Italian coast, but French. Crazy, right? I know. This was the only place I stayed where I used Airbnb. And this was because when I was booking everything, I was sort of going back and forth comparing the prices of hotels to Airbnbs and sort of picking whichever one was less money. And it happened to be that the hotels in Nice, they are pretty expensive, and I can see why. It's a very touristy place to go in the summer, and it's a pretty small town, so everything's pretty compact, and the hotels are either like extremely luxurious or not very nice. But I got very lucky and found an Airbnb like right in the heart of the city that was like literally like 30 steps from the beach. And it happened to be an apartment with like a loft in it. It was actually like made for either like a single person or couples, but me and my friend, we're very close. We didn't really care. Had a cute little terrace too where I hung some laundry. But it was super modern, and my friend was joking because when we first walked into it, there was all this scaffolding around the building, and you had to like go through two different doors, two sets of stairs, and she was like, I was really scared. But then we opened up the hallway to the actual unit, and it was gorgeous, like super modern, super luxurious. The apartment itself was super clean, well kept, and you could tell it had been recently renovated. So that was all good. And again, very, very beautiful. So the thing about Nice is that there's not a whole lot to do tourist wise. I think it's more of a like vacation spot. It's filled with little like beach clubs that line the beach. These are all like restaurants and clubs where you can rent a chair or a cabana for a price, and you're just like sitting on the beach. The beach itself, though, it's not sand. It's actually full of rocks, which made walking on it not very enjoyable. But the water was legit the bluest thing I've ever seen in my life. Like more blue than Hawaii, more blue than like the Bahama area. Like it was absolutely stunning. There are photos again on my Instagram if you want to go look at them. The other funny thing about the Airbnb, though, was that the host was unable to meet us to give us the keys because she had to go pick up her kids, I guess. So she sent me all these directions of like, okay, go to the little corner store, ask the guy for my name, and he'll give you the keys. And I was like, okay. And we like pull up, and it's this like cigarette tobacco store, and I'm just like, looking for this person's keys. And he was like, what? And I like pull up the text. He's like, oh, yes, of course. And it was just like the easiest thing ever. But I was like, this is a lot of work just trying to like figure all of this out. But our first night was pretty chill. When we got there, we were starving from, traveling from London and getting there. So we just like ate at like a little touristy restaurant, like right outside of our hotel. And when I say it was touristy there, I really mean it was touristy there. Part of me felt like the experience of it was a little, I don't know the word for it, but like I don't like when it's like too crowded with tourists, which is silly to say because I myself am a tourist there, just like everybody else is. But I realized that going to Europe in like the prime summer months, it's obviously going to be the most expensive and most busy because everyone's, happy to get out and do things, especially since post-COVID. But like the streets of Nice were just lined with people on vacation and on holiday doing things. And these restaurants would fill up so fast. They would close around like 2 o'clock and open again at like 7 or 8. There'd be lines of people like waiting to get a table because of like how busy it was there. So again, just something to keep in mind if you're thinking of visiting. We ended up just sitting at this like terrace bar that overlooked the promenade that's like very famous in the ocean, and just sort of sitting there having our spritzes and just sort of taking it all in. It almost felt very spring breakish because there were these like clubs directly next to us with like just like the longest line you could imagine of people like around our age trying to get into what looked like just a normal bar, just full of people playing American music like as loud as you could hear. So I could see the appeal when I was maybe a little bit younger, but I was like, that looks awful. But overall, like, the city itself was so cute and so quaint, and like I said, you could walk it pretty easily. It had a lot of cute alleyways. There was gelato lining the streets. You could pretty much sit anywhere and, get a drink, get a small appetizer. If you walked a little bit more into the city and then to the side, you would hit the like port area where all the yachts and all the boats were, and those were so stunning. Just how beautiful they were, and the amount of yachts there were. You're like, wow, there's a lot of money here. So that was cool to see. We did go and visit what's considered to be the famous hotel there, which is called Le Negresco, and we walked into it. Luckily, there wasn't any like security to get in, and it looked like a French Riviera painting, like chandeliers everywhere, and just like this old artwork of people lining the walls. The price was pretty steep to stay there. I can see why. It was a beautiful hotel. It had like multiple Michelin star restaurants in it. We just wanted to go and see it, honestly, and it was just kind of a fun thing to walk around. The other like main touristy thing is that there's this cool waterfall that overlooks the sort of like a lookout point. You need to climb a bunch of stairs and it takes you to this waterfall that like overlooks the city. So we did that one day, and it was funny because we were both wearing like skirts. We weren't really prepared for a hike, but we were like, well, we're really close to it, so we may as well do it now. A couple hundred steps up, we finally get there, and it was worth it. It was a really cool waterfall, and just seeing the overall like aerial drone like views of this very beautiful city. Like, the water was just, like I said, absolutely stunning and incredible. So seeing it from that perspective was definitely worth all the steps. But we were so hot. It was a hot city, not the hottest one I went to on the trip, but like we were sweating. We were like, it's time to go get some water. It's time to go sit down and have an Aperol spritz somewhere. So that was what we did after climbing this beautiful waterfall. We did try and do like a little bit of like a beach day because it is a beach town, but it just wasn't that fun like being on a rocky beach opposed to a sandy beach. And these day clubs that had the chairs, they were completely like sold out pretty much. You had to like book those well in advance, and I didn't really know if that was something we'd want to do, so we didn't book it in advance. So we just tried to like sit on the beach for like a little bit and just sort of people watch. But sitting on the rocks just like wasn't the funnest, so we just did that for like an hour or so, and then went back and got ready for dinner. And I would say that the highlight of Nice was this very epic restaurant that I found on TikTok about a month before the trip, called, I might butcher the name, but it's called Le Plongeois. I've posted about it a lot on TikTok and Instagram if you need more references on it. But it's basically this restaurant that is located on the ocean. It's almost like a cave looking giant terrace that's like built up on stills, and there's like a lounge portion that's like right on the ocean. Then the actual restaurant part, it has these amazing views. I don't know how else to describe it other than it's like the most aesthetically pleasing, most Instagrammable place I've ever been to. And it was very hard to get reservations. People were saying you got to book it 2 weeks in advance. And I was like, okay, great. I have a month till I get there. The days we were there, it was completely sold out. So I tried emailing them and being like, is there any way you can get 2 people in? And luckily they did. They got us in literally at like 30 minutes before closing at 9 o'clock. So we were able to get a spot, which was amazing, and we had so much extra time, and we wanted to make sure that we like really took in the scenery and like got to experience it. We actually got there at like 7 o'clock and just sat in the lounge area and like ordered drinks and an appetizer, took our photos, got our TikToks in, and really enjoyed it. It was good that we got there so early because there were lines forming just to get into the lounge area, because that's like a walk-in only thing. And then the actual restaurants, like, you have to have a reservation. So that was by far like the coolest thing we did there. Going to this restaurant that was, again, the most picturesque thing I've ever done. The food itself was it was good. It was not like a Michelin star restaurant. I think people go there more for the views and the overall aesthetic of it. I had this really good like shrimp risotto that was actually pretty decent. I would say go and plan it out in advance and make your reservation. Going at the time that we did was cool because the sun sets there around 9:30 at night. So as we were having dinner, we could like watch the sunset. So that was pretty cool. The other thing that we did while we were there was we did take a day trip to Monaco into Monte-Carlo. It's only about like a 20-minute train ride from Nice, and it's a pretty interesting country. It's like the smallest country in the world, yet known to be the most expensive and where all the like billionaires go. I was saying it was funny because of that movie with Selena Gomez where they are in Monte Carlo, and we were like, oh my gosh, like we actually like went to the hotel that she stayed in that movie, the Hotel de Paris, and there's like the famous casino right next to it. So we wanted to see that really badly and just sort of see like all the rich people walking around. Again, this is a place where there isn't a whole lot to do or see. Again, I think people just go to spend money, obviously. And there were beach clubs there, but a lot less. And it was kind of hard. When we got there, we had to walk up this very elevated, inclined path to get to the Hotel de Paris. And it's very hot. We've been in Europe for a while. Our feet hurt. So we get up there and we try to walk into the hotel just like we did at the other hotel in Nice. And the guy's like, do you have a reservation? And we're like, no. And we lie and say like, oh, we have a restaurant reservation because there's a ton of restaurants. And he's like, well, for where? Like, let me see. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, we gotta figure this out. So we go and we sit down at this little cafe and we're like trying to make a reservation for a restaurant in this hotel just to get in the hotel and see it, because we're like, Selena Gomez was here, like we just want to see it. It's super famous as is without it being related to that movie. But no, everything was sold out or just extremely expensive. So we were like, okay, I guess we won't be doing that. Like, and we were starving. We had not eaten anything all day, and we're climbing, these inclined paths because that's just how Europe is. So we're like, okay, let's just go find some food. So we walk away from the hotel and there's this like little shopping type thing next to it, and it says Hotel de Paris. And I'm like, let's just see what happens. And we walk in, and well enough, it leads us into the hotel. It's just like a separate entrance that has a bunch of like shopping, almost like Vegas, how there's all the like shopping within the hotels that like leads you further into the hotel. That's the best way I can compare it to. So I'm like, oh my God, we made our way in here. And I'm like, these people are so dumb. Like, they should have security lining the premises if they're that concerned about it. And we walked in and no one like batted an eye. I'm like, we just gotta, act like we belong here. So we walked around that hotel, which again was very beautiful. I actually preferred the other hotel. I thought it was a lot more grand. We walked around, we got our senses in. We tried to pee at every fancy hotel because the bathrooms in Europe can be a little So finding these nice hotels to pee in was something we always did. Might be too much information for you guys, but I don't care. And then after that, we found the sister hotel, which was about 2 blocks down, which was called the La Hermitage, I believe. And we walked around there for a while. And as we were leaving, we actually saw this restaurant that was like overlooking the entire like port of Monte Carlo, and it looked so beautiful. It was a Michelin star restaurant, and I'm like, should we go here? And we had just eaten like a little snack right before, because again we were starving. And I'm like, we obviously can't afford a full meal here. Like, let's just like have a drink, which is like a very common thing to do in America. Like, just sit down for drinks. slightly less common, I think, in Europe, because they were like, you only want a drink. And we were like, well, we'll take a drink and a dessert just to like make it look a little bit better on our part. But they were just like kind of surprised. But whatever, we sat down, we had this nice dessert, which was very overpriced. But again, you're in Monaco. And we had the nice view, and we finally just got to like sit down and relax. And again, like there was just not that much to do in Monte-Carlo. Our train tickets going back to Nice weren't until 9 o'clock at night, because I was like, well, we want to have a full day there. And by 3 p.m. we were like, yeah, we need to go back. Like there's nothing else to do and we're tired. So we ended up just walking around the port where all the boats were, and then we made our way back to the train station and headed back to Nice. And these trains were fully booked out, and I mean like they were overbooked. Like you couldn't sit down. I was fully expecting to like have a seat on the train, but it was full of people. And of course everyone would like get off once they got to Monaco, or like vice versa in Nice, because those are the two biggest, I guess, cities people were visiting. So we had to stand like directly next to other people the entire time we were on the train. And it was funny because there was this dad and his son sitting, and they were speaking French like the whole time during the train ride to each other. And then when they had to get off, they had their luggage in the little like hold area that me and my friend were standing by, and he immediately turns to us and in English says, oh, you guys can sit here if you want, we need to get our luggage. And my friend and I had not spoken a word to each other because we were just tired, and we're like, let's get on the train and get home. And I'm like, what about us gives you the impression that we only speak English? Like, we haven't spoken. If we had spoken, I'd be like, okay, you heard us speaking English. But we hadn't spoken, so I'm like, what about us screams American? But kind of funny, kind of not. But yeah, the rest of the time in Nice was very relaxed. I did do some laundry because there was a washing machine there. And like I said, I'm in Europe for 20 days, so I was trying to get all my laundry done and was sort of just hanging it outside. I think we really take for granted dryers in the States because things do not dry quickly over there. We had some stuff hanging for like 24 hours that was still wet. Got to a point where I was like, we gotta take our stuff outside, and even that, it was still kind of damp. So I can only imagine what it's like to like wash bed sheets and comforters over there. Like, it must just take forever. And our last night in Nice was actually very fun. We walked around on the beach, we had a nice dinner, we just sort of took in, the last sunset, and really just had a good, nice time people watching, looking at everything. I'm glad we went back to Nice and didn't like spend the full day in Monte-Carlo. I think it would have just gotten overwhelming, and everything was just way too expensive there, because it literally is made for millionaires and billionaires. But that was our time in Nice, and then the next morning is when my friend left to go back to the States, and I left to go back on the rest of my trip. So some things I wrote down about France, and I've been to France before, but only Paris and one other city, never the French Riviera. This is not breaking news, but the French just aren't as friendly in general. We didn't like make any friends while we were there, or like go up to other people. It was very touristy, but they're just not as friendly. Like at one of the restaurants, we sat down for a drink, and they will like print you a receipt right off of their billing machine. And I went to pull the receipt off of it, and like the entire receipt paper came out, and the guy like immediately, the waiter was like, oh my gosh, like slapped himself in the head in frustration. And I was like, I'm so sorry, like I thought I was meant to grab this, because he was like pointing it at me to grab, and he's like, no, and I was like, okay, I'm so sorry, like here. And then I like got up to go to the bathroom because I was so embarrassed. So just not as friendly in general. Another thing that we noticed was for the train, our train to Monte-Carlo was at 9:50 in the morning, and it took us a really long time to figure out which train we were on, because of the way that they said the trains. There's like a giant sign that said like 9 hours and 50 minutes. And we thought of that as like a duration. We were like, wait, 9 hours? Who's going on a train for 9 hours? Like, that's crazy. And we were like, oh, wait, that's the time. Like 9 hours and 50 minutes. But the way it was written on the board made it look like more of a duration instead of a time. So that was something we had to figure out. But it's all these little things that you like learn along the way that kind of make the trip fun, because you're just like, oh, things are different here. We have to adapt to them. The other major thing we learned in France specifically, but this is kind of the same in a few other countries as well, was that if you go to a restaurant, they don't automatically just seat you with the menu, which is interesting because usually the hostess will just seat you and give you the menu. But they would just seat us, and then like 5-10 minutes later, they'd be like, oh, here's your menu. Like, oh, okay, I could have just been looking at this the whole time, but whatever. The other thing is that they won't just bring you the check. So like in the States, if they're like, do you want dessert? Are you guys done? You'll be like, yeah, we're done. We don't want anything. Like, thank you so much. And then they'll usually bring you the check a few minutes later, or sometimes you'll be like, we'll just take the check. But here, and at every single restaurant we went to, like, especially at that one in Monaco where we were like, we're just going to have a drink and dessert. Like, we fully finished our drink, fully finished our dessert. We were like, no, we're okay. Like, we don't want anything else. They didn't come back for like 30 minutes. And I was like, don't they want their table? Like, don't they want to turn this? And they will not bring you the check until you specifically ask them for it, which I find interesting in a few ways. One being, it's kind of cool that they just want you to like enjoy your time. And because tipping is not a thing over there, at least in this country it wasn't, they're not like trying to turn tables like they are here in the States, where they're like making money off of each table. Like, I could sit there all day, but like it doesn't really affect their pay. It's also just interesting because usually, you know, if someone says, hey, I'm done, I'm good to go, like, you would be like, okay, cool, here's your check. But over there, it's like they fully wait until you ask for it. So I was like, I wonder how long we can sit here before they're like, what are you doing? So that was a fun fact that we learned about France particularly. And again, this happened to me in a couple other places I went to as well. But overall thoughts about Nice was absolutely gorgeous. So happy I went. I think it was a great choice. I'm happy that my friend came with me there as well. I would have had fun by myself, but it's more fun to have a friend with you. And Monte-Carlo's a fun trip. I'd say it's more of a half-day trip if you're trying to actually stay there. Unless you're staying at one of those super fancy hotels I mentioned and you have thousands to spend a night. I think it'd be super worth it if you're like a millionaire who can afford that lifestyle. But again, there's just not that many touristy things to see. So it's just sort of a cool thing to be able to be like, hey, I went there, I saw it. So I am happy that we went, and I'm even happier that we were able to find a way to sneak into the Hotel de Paris, because that was something that we both really wanted to do. But anyways, thank you guys so much for listening to this second mini episode about my 20 days in Europe. The next episode will be focused on my time in Madrid. Never been to Madrid before, so this is another country or another city where I was sort of learning as I went. So I'm excited to tell you guys about that next week. And again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you guys next week.